The recurring dream. I've always been the kind of person who brushes off weird stuff. You know, the type who rationalizes everything. Bad dreams, déjà vu, even that eerie feeling you get when you're alone in the dark. But this was different. It started about a month ago, right after I moved into my new apartment. The stress of the move must have triggered something, because that's when the dreams began. At first, there were just flashes, blurry images of a forest, the kind you'd see in a low-budget horror movie. But then one night it got clearer, too clear. I saw him that IT was Tommy, my childhood best friend. We were inseparable back then, always riding our bikes around the neighborhood or building forts in the woods. But Tommy disappeared when we were 10. Just vanished one day, like he'd never existed. No trace, no explanation, nothing. And now, here he was, standing at the edge of that forest in my dream, looking exactly the way I remembered him. Same messy blonde hair, same crooked smile, even the same red hoodie he always wore. He didn't say a word, just stared at me with this intensity, like he was trying to tell me something. Then he raised his hand and gestured for me to follow him into the trees. Every time, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding like I'd just run a marathon, like tea first. I tried to convince myself it was just stress. Moving to a new city, starting a new job, it was a lot to handle. But the dreams kept coming, every night like clockwork. Tommy was always there, standing at the edge of that forest, beckoning me to follow. It got to the point where I dreaded going to sleep. I started drinking chamomile tea, meditating, even tried sleeping pills, but nothing worked. Then, one afternoon, while I was unpacking a box of old stuff from my parents' house, I found it. A photo that IT was one of those faded Polaroid from the 90s, the edges slightly curled and the colors washed out. In the picture, Tommy and I were sitting on our bikes, grinning like idiots. We must have been 9 or 10, just a few days before he disappeared. But what made my blood run cold was the background. Behind us, barely visible through the trees, was the same forest from my dreams. The same dense, shadowy woods where Tommy kept gesturing for me to follow. My hands shook as I stared at it. How could I have forgotten that place? And why was it showing up in my dreams now, after all these years? I couldn't shake the feeling that the photo meant something. It was like a puzzle piece I didn't even know I was missing. So, I did what any rational person would do. I Googled the old neighborhood. Turns out, the forest had been cleared years ago, right after Tommy disappeared. The articles were vague, but they mentioned unexplained accidents during the construction of a new housing development. Workers reported tools going missing, equipment breaking down, and one guy even claimed he saw a kid in a red hoodie watching him from the trees. Reading that sent a chill down my spine. I knew I had to go back. The next weekend, I drove to the old neighborhood. It looked nothing like I remembered. The forest was gone, replaced by rows of identical houses and neatly trimmed lawns. I parked my car and walked around, trying to orient myself. It felt surreal, like I was standing in two places at once, the past and the present. I found the spot where the photo was taken, now someone's backyard. As I stood there, a strange feeling washed over me, like I was being watched. I turned around, half expecting to see Tommy standing there, but there was nothing, just the wind rustling through the trees that were left. That's when I noticed something sticking out of the ground near the fence. It was a small, weathered piece of fabric, red, like Tommy's hoodie, that I picked up the fabric, my fingers trembling. It was old and frayed, but there was no mistaking the color. I shoved it into my pocket, my mind racing. Was this some kind of sick joke? A coincidence? I didn't know what to think. That night, the dream stopped. For the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully, without Tommy or the forest haunting me. I thought maybe it was over, that finding the fabric had somehow broken whatever spell I was under. But then, 3 days later, I got the first letter to IT arrived in a plain, white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the words scrawled in messy, uneven handwriting. But getting closer, my stomach dropped. I turned the paper over, looking for some kind of clue, but there was nothing. Just those 3 words. I tried to convince myself it was a prank, maybe from one of my new neighbors who'd seen me poking around. But deep down, I knew better. The letters kept coming, always cryptic, always unsettling. He's waiting. Don't stop now. The forest remembers. Each one felt like a piece of a puzzle I didn't know how to solve. And then, one night, I got the final letter. It said, "Meet me at the edge." I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on my couch, staring at the letter, my mind racing. What did the edge mean? The edge of the forest? The edge of town? Or something else entirely? By morning, I made up my mind. I had to go back. I had to see this through, no matter how scared I was. I drove to the old neighborhood again, this time just as the sun was setting. The streets were quiet, the houses bathed in an eerie orange glow. I parked near the spot where the forest used to be and started walking, the letters tucked into my pocket like some kind of twisted map. I reached the edge of the development. Where the last of the trees still stood, I felt that same prickling sensation of being watched. My heart pounded as I stepped into the shadows, the air growing cooler with every step. And then I saw him, Tommy. He was standing there, just like in my dreams, his red hoodie bright against the darkening trees. But this time, it wasn't a dream. He looked real, solid, like he hadn't aged a day since we were kids. He didn't say anything, just stared at me with those same intense eyes, then turned and walked deeper into the woods. I hesitated for a moment, my instinct screaming at me to run, but something pulled me forward. I had to know the truth that I followed him, the trees closing in around me as the daylight faded. The deeper I went, the heavier the air felt, like the forest itself was alive and watching. Tommy moved effortlessly, never looking back, always just out of reach. Finally, we stopped in a small clearing. He turned to face me, and for the first time he spoke. His voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "You shouldn't have come back," he said. Before I could respond, he stepped backward into the shadows and vanished. Just like that. Gone. I stood there, frozen, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The forest was silent, the only sound the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. I don't know how long I stayed there, but eventually I forced myself to leave. The letters stopped after that, and so did the dreams. I never saw Tommy again. To this day, I don't know what happened to him all those years ago or why he led me to that clearing. But sometimes late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of red out of the corner of my eye, and I'll feel that same chill. The forest remembers, and so do I. The locked closet. My wife and I had always talked about buying an old house. Something with character, you know? Not one of those modern, cookie-cutter homes that all look the same. So, when we found this Victorian-style place in a quiet neighborhood, it felt like we'd hit the jackpot. The realtor mentioned it had been on the market for a while, but we didn't think much of it. The house had everything we wanted: hardwood floors, a fireplace, and enough space for our 4-year-old son, Max. We moved in during the fall, just as the leaves were starting to turn, and everything seemed fine at first. That is, until I noticed the closet in Max's room. It was a small closet, tucked into the corner of his bedroom, with an old, rusted lock on the door. When I asked the realtor about it, she shrugged and said the key had been lost years ago. The previous owners never opened it, she told me, like it was no big deal. That should have been my first red flag, but I was too busy unpacking boxes and trying to fix the leaky faucet in the bathroom. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me, and I called a locksmith to open it. When he finally got the door open, we were met with nothing. Just an empty closet, a faint smell of mildew, and a single, child-sized handprint on the back wall. It was creepy, but I tried to brush it off. Old houses have quirks, right? I couldn't have been more wrong that a couple of nights after we opened the closet, Max started having nightmares. He'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, and pointing at his bedroom door. "The man in the closet," he'd cry, over and over. My wife and I tried to calm him down, but it was like he was seeing something we couldn't. The weirdest part? We'd never even mentioned the closet to him. He'd never asked about it, and we hadn't talked about it in front of him. So how'd he know? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he'd heard us talking to the locksmith, or maybe it was just his imagination running wild. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The nightmares kept happening almost every night, and Max started refusing to sleep in his room. He'd beg to sleep in our bed, and when we tried to put him back in his own room, he'd scream like he was being hurt. It was exhausting, and my wife and I were at our wits' end. One night, after another episode, I decided to do some digging. I started researching the house's history, looking for anything that might explain what was going on. That's when I found it. An old newspaper article from the 1970s about a child who went missing in the neighborhood. The case was never solved, and the article mentioned that the boy had last been seen near our street. My stomach dropped as I read the details. Could this be connected to the closet? To Max's nightmares? I didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were starting to fit together in a way that made my skin crawl. The next morning, I decided to take a closer look at the closet. I grabbed a flashlight and inspected every inch of it, hoping to find something, anything, that might explain what was going on. The handprint on the wall was still there, faint but unmistakable. It looked like it had been made by a small child, maybe around Max's age. I ran my fingers over it, and for a second, I swear I felt a chill like the temperature in the room had dropped. I shook it off and kept looking. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before, tiny scratches on the inside of the closet door, near the bottom. They were shallow, but deliberate, like someone had been trying to claw their way out. My heart started pounding, and I felt a knot tighten in my chest. What the hell had happened in this house? I didn't tell my wife about the scratches, not right away. She was already stressed out enough with Max's nightmares, and I didn't want to make things worse. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, after everyone was asleep, I went back to Max's room and sat by the closet. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe some kind of sign, some clue that would make sense of all this. But the room was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's pressing down on you. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at that closet, until I finally gave up and went to bed. As I lay there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting, and then I heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from Max's room. It was soft, almost like a child's fingers drumming against wood. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The tapping stopped as suddenly as it had started, but I didn't sleep a wink the rest of the night. The next day, I decided to reach out to the previous owners. The realtor had given us their contact information when we bought the house, but we never bothered to call them. Now, I needed answers. When I finally got a hold of the woman who used to live here, she was hesitant to talk at first. But after some convincing, she told me something that made my stomach drop. She said her daughter used to sleep in Max's room and would often talk about the man in the closet. They'd never seen anything, but their daughter had been so terrified that they eventually moved her to another room and kept the closet locked. We just thought it was her imagination, she said, her voice trembling. But now, I don't know, her words hung in the air, and I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. This wasn't just in Max's head. Something was in that closet. That night, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I grabbed a crowbar and went into Max's room, determined to tear the closet apart if I had to. My wife tried to stop me, saying it was a bad idea, but I was past the point of reasoning. I pried off the shelves, ripped up the baseboards, and even knocked a hole in the back wall. That's when I found it, a small, hidden compartment behind the wall, just big enough for a child to crawl into. Inside, there was nothing but a single, rusted toy car and a faint, lingering smell of mildew. My hands were shaking as I pulled the car out, and that's when I heard it, a soft, whispered voice, so faint I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Help me." I dropped the crowbar and stumbled back, my heart racing. The voice didn't come again, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. Something, or someone, was in that closet, and it wasn't going away. After that night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I started digging deeper into the history of the house and the neighborhood, spending hours at the local library and scrolling through old newspaper archives. That's when I found another article, one that sent chills down my spine. It mentioned that the missing boy from the 1970s had last been seen playing with a toy car, a red one, just like the one I'd found in the closet. The article also mentioned that the boy's family had lived just a few houses down from ours. My mind raced with possibilities. Had the boy been lured into our house? Was he trapped in that closet somehow? It sounded insane, but the pieces were too specific to ignore. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something dark and unexplainable. I decided to confront whatever was in the closet. That night, I sat in Max's room with a flashlight, staring at the open closet door. The air felt heavy, like it was charged with electricity, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I knew I had to face it. Then, just as I was about to give up, I saw it, a shadow moving inside the closet, darker than the surrounding blackness. It shifted, like someone was standing there, watching me. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a wave of cold wash over me. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, I heard it again, that same faint, whispered voice. "Help me." This time, it was clearer, more desperate. I didn't know what to do. I felt paralyzed, caught between fear and the overwhelming urge to reach out. But before I could move, the shadow vanished, and the room fell silent again. The next morning, I called a priest. I'm not a religious guy, but at that point, I was willing to try anything. When he arrived, he walked through the house quietly, stopping in Max's room to examine the closet. He didn't say much, but I could tell by the look on his face that he felt it too, the heaviness, the unease. He performed a blessing, sprinkling holy water around the room and reciting prayers in a low, steady voice. I stood in the doorway, holding Max's hand, hoping this would be the end of it. For a while, it seemed like it worked. Max stopped having nightmares, and the house felt lighter somehow. I thought maybe we'd finally put whatever was to rest. But then, a week later, I found Max standing in front of the closet, staring at the open door. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with fear. "Daddy," he said, his voice trembling. "The man says he wants to play." My blood ran cold. I grabbed Max and pulled him away from the closet, slamming the door shut. That's when I made the decision. We couldn't stay in that house anymore. Whatever was in that closet, it wasn't going to leave us alone. We packed up our things and moved out within the week, leaving the closet and its secrets behind. To this day, I don't know who or what was in there. But I do know this. Some doors are better left closed. We moved into a new house across town, and for the first time in months, things felt normal again. Max stopped talking about the man in the closet, and the nightmares disappeared. My wife and I never brought it up, not even to each other. It was like we'd made an unspoken agreement to leave that part of our lives behind. But sometimes, late at night, I'll catch myself thinking about that closet. I'll wonder about the handprint on the wall, the scratches on the door, and the voice that whispered for help. I'll wonder if we did the right thing by leaving, or if we just abandoned someone or something that needed us. That a few months after we moved, I drove past the old house. It was empty, the windows dark, and the for sale sign still standing in the yard. I sat in my car for a while, staring at the upstairs window that had been Max's room. Part of me wanted to go inside to see if the closet was still there, if the handprint was still on the wall. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I drove away and never looked back. To this day, I don't know what was in that closet. Maybe it was the spirit of the missing boy, trapped and searching for a way out. Or maybe it was something else, something darker. All I know is that some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some doors are better left locked. The family heirloom. I've never been one to believe in curses. Growing up, my dad always said they were just stories people told to explain bad luck or things they couldn't understand. But that was before the music box. My Aunt Margaret left it to me when she passed away last spring. She was my dad's older sister, a no-nonsense woman with a sharp wit and a house full of strange antiques. She'd always warned me about the music box, saying it was cursed, but I'd brushed it off. I mean, come on, cursed objects? That's the stuff of horror movies, not real life. Still, when the lawyer handed it to me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The box was heavier than it looked, made of dark, polished wood with intricate carvings of roses and vines that seemed to writhe under the light. The key was missing, but Aunt Margaret had always said it didn't need one. "It plays when it wants to," she told me once, her voice low and serious. I'd laughed it off back then, but now, holding it in my hands, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. For the first few weeks, the music box just sat on my bookshelf, blending in with the clutter of my small apartment. Life was hectic. I was juggling work, my 6-year-old son, Ethan, and the never-ending chaos of being a single dad. But then, one night, I heard it. I was in the kitchen, reheating leftovers, when a faint, tinkling melody drifted down the hallway. It was soft, almost like a whisper, but it stopped me in my tracks. My stomach dropped as I turned off the microwave and listened. The tune was haunting, beautiful in a way that made my chest tighten. I followed the sound to Ethan's room, where I found him sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the music box. It was open, the tiny metal cylinder spinning, playing that eerie melody. My heart pounded. "Ethan, did you open this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He shook his head, his big brown eyes wide. "It just started playing, Dad," he said. I picked it up, my hands shaking. The key was still missing. How had it wound itself? I closed the lid and put it back on the shelf, telling myself it was just a weird coincidence. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Over the next few days, strange things kept happening. The music box would play at random times, always when Ethan was nearby. I'd be in the living room, watching TV, and that melody would start drifting down the hallway. I'd rush to Ethan's room, only to find him sitting quietly, staring at the box like it was whispering secrets to him. Once, I caught him humming the tune under his breath while he was coloring at the kitchen table. My blood ran cold. "Where did you learn that song, buddy?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He looked up at me, confused. "I don't know," he said. "It's just in my head." That's when I started to really worry. I never heard that melody before, not until the music box started playing it. And now, it was like it had burrowed into my son's mind, and I decided to do some digging. Late one night, after Ethan was asleep, I sat down on my laptop and started researching the music box. It took hours, but I finally found something. The box was an antique, made in the early 1900s by a craftsman who specialized in custom pieces. According to an old newspaper article, it had belonged to a little girl named Clara, who died tragically in a house fire. Her family had kept the music box as a memento, but they claimed it was cursed, that it would play on its own, even when no one was near it. The article mentioned that the melody it played was the same one Clara had been humming the night she died. My stomach churned as I read the words. I glanced over at the music box, sitting on the shelf like an innocent trinket, but it wasn't innocent. And now it was in my house, in my son's room. I knew I had to get rid of it. The next morning, I decided to act. I waited until Ethan was at school, then grabbed the music box and shoved it into a grocery bag. I didn't even want to touch it anymore. It felt wrong, like holding something alive. I drove to a thrift store across town, figuring I'd donate it and let it become someone else's problem. But as I walked up to the donation counter, my hands started to sweat. The woman behind the counter smiled at me, but I couldn't bring myself to hand the bag over. What if it ended up with another kid? What if it hurt someone else's family? I muttered an excuse and left, the box still in my hands. I thought about throwing it in a dumpster, but something stopped me. It was like the box didn't want to be thrown away. I drove home, feeling more unsettled than ever. When I got back, Ethan was already home from school. He was sitting on the living room floor, building something with his Legos, but he looked up the second I walked in. "Where's the music box, Dad?" he asked, his voice calm, but his eyes intense. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" I said, trying to play dumb. He stood up and walked over to me, his small face serious. "I can feel it," he said. "It's sad. It doesn't want to go away." I stared at him, my heart pounding. How could he know? I hadn't said a word about trying to get rid of it. I forced a smile and ruffled his hair. "Don't worry about it, buddy," I said, but my voice shook. That night, after he went to bed, I locked the music box in the trunk of my car, hoping distance would break whatever hold it had on him. But when I woke up the next morning, it was back on the shelf in his room, clean and polished, like it had never left, that I couldn't take it anymore. The music box was playing more frequently now, sometimes in the middle of the night, waking me with its eerie melody. I'd bowled out of bed, heart racing, only to find Ethan standing in his room, staring at the box with a blank expression. He wouldn't respond when I called his name, not until the music stopped. Then he'd blink, look at me like nothing had happened, and ask if he could go back to bed. It was like he was sleepwalking, but worse, like something was controlling him. I started sleeping on the floor in his room, hoping to catch the box in the act, but every time I was close to catching it play on its own, I'd wake up to silence, the box sitting perfectly still. It was messing with me, and I didn't know how much longer I could take it. One afternoon, I came home from work to find Ethan sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, the music box open in front of him. He was humming that damn tune again, his voice soft but steady. I dropped my bag and knelt beside him. "Ethan, what are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. He didn't look at me. "She's here," he said quietly. My blood turned to ice. "Who's here, buddy?" I asked, my throat dry. He finally looked up at me, his eyes distant, like he was seeing something I couldn't. "Clara," he said. "She's sad. She wants to play with me." I grabbed the music box and slammed it shut, my hands trembling. Ethan started crying, big, heaving sobs that broke my heart. "Don't take it away, Dad," he begged. "She's my friend." I didn't know what to do. My son was terrified, but so was I, and I had no idea how to fix this. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this, watching my son get pulled deeper into whatever nightmare the music box was creating. I waited until Ethan was asleep, then took the box and drove to the edge of town where the old cemetery was. It was pitch black, the kind of darkness that feels heavy, like it's pressing down on you. I parked my car and walked to the gates, the music box tucked under my arm. I didn't have a plan, not really. I just knew I had to do something. I found Clara's grave after a few minutes of searching, the headstone small and weathered, the dates barely legible. "Clara," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I don't know if you can hear me, but please leave my son alone. He's just a kid." I set the music box on the ground in front of the grave and stepped back, my heart pounding. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the lid creaked open and the melody began to play, soft and mournful in the stillness of the night. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, watching the music box play on its own. But when it finally stopped, I felt a shift in the air, like something had let go. I picked up the box and buried it right there, next to Clara's grave, using my hands to dig into the cold, damp earth. It felt wrong to leave it, but it felt even worse to take it back. When I got home, Ethan was still asleep, his face peaceful for the first time in weeks. I sat on the edge of his bed, watching him breathe, and prayed that it was over. The next morning, he didn't mention Clara or the music box. He just smiled at me over his cereal and asked if we could go to the park after school. I almost cried with relief. For a while, things seemed normal again. Ethan was back to his cheerful, energetic self, and the house felt lighter, like a shadow had been lifted. I told myself it was over, that burying the music box had broken whatever connection it had to my son. But sometimes, late at night, I'd wake up to the faint sound of humming. I'd sit up in bed, my heart racing, and listen, but it would always stop before I could be sure it was real. I never told Ethan about it. He didn't need to know. He was happy, and that was all that mattered. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, waiting. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe it was Clara lingering in the edges of our lives. I didn't know, and I didn't want to find out. Years have passed since that summer, and Ethan is older now. He doesn't remember the music box or the strange things that happened. Sometimes, though, I catch him humming a tune under his breath, one I've never heard before. It's soft and haunting, and it sends a chill down my spine every time. I never tell him to stop. I just listen, my chest tight, and hope that whatever followed us home that night is finally at peace. The music box is gone, buried in the ground where it belongs, but I can't help wondering if it's still playing somewhere, its melody drifting through the darkness, searching for someone new. I don't believe in curses, not really, but I'll never forget the summer I learned that some things can't be explained, no matter how hard you try.